The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I would like to, due to the number of attendees, where everybody has been muted, and please utilize the chat feature if you have issues with the broadcast or questions, and we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. With that, Rick Altenau.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess those of you on the West Coast, good morning. So today we are going to get into a little bit about Tailoring XA. This was actually a request by a couple of our customers, and it came through the XA user group. We have been using XA, and some of us have been using something called Mapix for a number of years. And really we've lost, in many cases, the knowledge of how to configure the product and how the product itself is flexible. We have the ability to go in and customize how some of these things are used. But as people turn over, as jobs turn over, we come in, we use the screens the way they've always been, we use the system the way they always have been, and we don't always take advantage of some of the things that we can personalize for our own use. So today we would just want to touch base on a couple of key functions in the XA world and make sure you're aware of those things. If you have questions, please make sure you contact your affiliate or contact me, and I can clarify what those questions are. We're not going to go through every configuration option in the system. We'd be here for 2 days. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure you understand how the system can be configured, where those functions are, and some of the key things associated with each application. So with that being said, I will jump into this process. One of the first things that we have to do when we're looking at configuring the system is really, this is an IT function, but look at where our files and our programs are in the first place. So I'm going to break this down into 2 pieces. The first part will be shorter because it is more technical. It does deal with your server and where the information is stored. We're going to touch on that, but it does affect you as a user. So it's important that you understand these concepts. Then we're going to get into the questionnaires, the control files of how the system can be configured for your use. So to start out with, we are going to look at the technology. Now, technology, as it says, is very powerful in how we access the system. I am sure you have either you're aware of or you have heard people talking about, are you in the test environment? Are you in the live environment? How do you know what those things are? How does it affect how you use the system? Hopefully all of you have a test or a play environment so that when you want to change systems, when you want to experiment with something, see how it will work, you're not necessarily messing up your live data. And we want to be able to make sure that that play area is available to you. So anyway, what does that mean? Where is this information stored? Let's make sure we understand what those concepts are. So the first thing we do is our system is on an IBM I, which is a power system. It's been renamed through the years. Those of you who've been around long enough know the name AS400. Some of you know the I series, then it was the System I. So it went through a couple of different names. Right now it is a power system, and this is a very, very robust and secure system in the market, one of the best in the market. If you've heard commercials or seen things about IBM's Watson, it's based on the same technology. It is the I series that's designed to run business systems. Its history goes back to System 34, 36, 38, but the current system is a server. And we're using it as a server when we are in IDF. When we are using green screen, we're using that older technology. Really want to move on beyond that wherever possible. That's not the point of today, but if you are still using a lot of green screen, you need to talk to your IT department, you need to talk to your affiliate. How do you move on beyond that and really get into the more modern technology? But one way or another, the XA database is sitting on this IBM Power System. This is the first part of how you configure your system. Now, if you are a one location, one warehouse manufacturer, one plant, you probably have a single I series, a single IBM system. That's not unusual. But it's also not unusual for our customers now to have multiple plants in multiple countries and to be able to configure multiple systems. How do these all work together? Well, as we're looking at this, we are putting that XA database on the IBM I. We are putting it on that Power System, and I keep going back with names. I'm sorry, I'll be more consistent. The Power System. It really doesn't make any difference if you're looking at going to a cloud or if you're doing this on premise, because your XA system is still on that IBM Power System. If it's in the cloud, it's being hosted. If it's on premise, it's in your facility somewhere. So the question is, if you're a multi-plant facility, do you have more than one I-series? Do you have more than one source of your XA systems? In that case, you can load your software twice. If you have two different divisions running two different power systems, it's the ultimate in security. You can't even share data back and forth to each other. Now, there are tools within XA that allow us to share that data, but it is the ultimate in secure because you have your own system, your own plant, you control your own computer. So you can load XA in each one of these things. In this case, whether you're both sister companies or you're working together, your data does not have to be compatible because you have two completely separate systems. You could both be using Warehouse 1, even though in your different companies, they are different locations. So when you have a separate system, you have no controls that link back and forth to each other. There you have to get more, we have to be more careful when we're trying to talk to each other and how do we share data. But you have one system on each system. But what happens if I have multiple companies and I don't necessarily want to buy another IBM system? These things are so powerful. It's not unusual to find out, geez, I'm only using 30% of my computer power. Why do I have to buy another system? Well, we don't. We can actually split an I-series. Now, what I mean by that is this is called a logical partition. Literally to the user, you are on two different computers. You're sharing the computer chips that do the processing. But you have your own memory, you have your own disk, you have your own software that's loaded. In this particular case, instead of having two IBM systems, I have two versions of XA loaded on the same system, but they're in their own logical partition. Now, when I say a partition is separate, I mean right down to the operating system. Each side of this computer needs to have its own operating system. All you're doing is sharing those chips. So if you have enough computer power to do this, and you have enough disk and memory, you can actually run them separately. Now, this is interesting because nowadays, so much more of our usage of the system is based on internet, is based on things that are not specific to our ERP files. Because of that, we have things that share data across our entire system. So for instance, if you have two different environments and you're trying to load an application that allows you to have two different companies, what we have to do is we have to, excuse me, I was just interrupted. We have to allow, my apologies, I lost my train of thought. We have two different systems. We have two XA systems loaded. We have to make sure we have the separate operating systems to manage those processes. I'll come back to where I was. Let's move on. Now, inside one logical partition, I can still load two versions of XA. Here, I'm going to go back to what I just missed a minute ago. I have certain capabilities on the system now, something called Link Manager, for instance, that manage all the environments in one partition. If I truly want to test internet functions, if I truly want to test portals, if I truly want to test some of these capabilities that share across systems, I really need to have a test partition. But as long as I'm sharing one system, one logical partition, some of those things are going to be in common. In this particular case, I have two environments loaded. That could be two different companies. It could be a production environment and a test environment. One way or another, we have to identify what those functions are inside of our system. Now, we identify them in XA using our environment codes. Now your default, something you've probably heard a lot, you sign into the MM environment. That's the default from years ago. What does that mean? How does that work? Those environments are identifying your programs and your files. So the way it works is the first code, when you say MM, is saying this is where my programs are. In these libraries, I'm going to store all my programs. The second code is where I'm storing my files. So as you can see in the examples here on the right-hand side of the screen, I have an MM environment. Well, I have programs and I have files in two different functions. I have an AB environment. You can load XA as often as you want. And then on each program set, you can load separate data files. So on the bottom half, I have an example where I only load the programs once. Why don't I share the programs? They're not data. So in this case, I have two environments, two file environments, but they share a program environment. So I have FF and I have FG. So those two-digit codes, if you never knew what they were, that first code represents your programs. The second code represents your files. So if you have a MM environment and an MT environment, and your MT environment, your IT department has told you is your test environment, you have test files so that you can play with your programs, but not have to deal with your live files. So that's where those codes come from. That's what they mean. Everything I've covered in the last 5 slides is very much technical, IT oriented. If you're buying a new system, if you're upgrading systems, these are not things you change on the fly. These are things you have to plan for, you have to install, you have to make sure that you understand how those things work, but it is going to be an IT function. Those of us that are users, once that is loaded and operational, we are a user of those files in those environments. So that's just the background. I needed you to understand that so that you understand why you can go into a test environment, why you can play with things and change things. Because I'm about to show you how you can change the configurations of XA. If you do that, I don't recommend that you leave this webinar and go start changing things. You may be authorized, depending what your security is. That's not what we're recommending. Make sure that you work with IT, make sure that you are in a test environment, and you walk through the processes of what can happen. Some of these have major impacts on your system. So let's talk about the configuration of the system. The data, the control files, the questionnaires, how do we get to this? And what are some of the examples that we can configure? Well, first, we have something called questionnaires. This is in CrossApp. This has been around since Mapix came out in 1978. Yes, that long ago, Mapix 1. We are now on the 4th generation of that product, so that is luckily long gone. But the idea of the questionnaire has stayed with the system through the years. There's a good possibility 99% of this will go away in the next 2 major releases. Hopefully some of you had a chance to sit in on Inforum this week, the virtual Inforum, and you saw Ross's release roadmap information, and you saw David Foster's Netlink information. Both of them are major new capabilities of the system, and it really shows the direction where XA is going. We have the largest PTF release of XA in its history coming up. So we have a lot of new capabilities that are coming out. And these questionnaires are being minimized. The main reason is a questionnaire change is a dedicated change to the environment. Nobody can be in it. And in some cases, it's difficult to get your environment cleared. But a questionnaire change can change your file structures, can change things that people cannot be in your files when it's doing that, depending on what some of the questionnaire changes you make. So the questionnaire is still a green screen function. It's still left over from that old CrossApp capability. I'm going to show you what it looks like, but we're going to go through that and also then talk about the new control files, which are in IDF. Those are called application settings. Many of the things that we want to do, for instance, in purchasing, we have 2 different PO formats. If you're still using the pre-printed forms, another issue that hopefully you're not, but if you're still using the pre-printed forms, we have two different formats that you can select from. Well, how does the system know which one to use? It's in the control files. It's in the settings. So we can go in and change those things. How does it always know what company name to put on top of your reports? In the control files. So let's take a look at some of these things. First, let's look at the questionnaire. Now you can go into CrossApp, and if you are authorized, again, this is a dedicated system, in the master menu, if you go into number 6, which is install Tailor, that will make sure that the system's dedicated. It will sit there for 2 or 3 minutes if it's not, and then it'll give you an error message saying it couldn't get to a dedicated system. But the install Tailor is how you go in and change the questions. Now on the right side of the screen, I have an inquiry of what the questions are. In this particular case, this is an inquiry over customer order management. Yes, customer order management. The application names in IDF would be customer service management. In green screen, customer order management. The first code at the beginning of the question is the code that represents your menu. So again, in COM, it was AMBM00. That was the COM main menu. So B, the 4th character, AMB, the 3rd character, is the B right here. The X on top is CrossApp. So this is just a quick example. We're going to go into more detail, but we can see how some of these questions are asked and how you answer these so that you are setting up your system. I'll zoom in on those questions. Here it is. Same question as an example. So B002, do you want to price orders at entry time? Well, many people didn't know that you also have the option of pricing orders at invoice time. If you are in a environment where you are updating your prices daily, maybe even hourly, based on the current market price of a product, if you are selling something that's gold plated, if you're selling jewelry, if you're selling oil. When I took an order 2 days ago, the price of oil today is different than it was 2 days ago. So in your particular case, you don't want to price your customer order when you enter it. You want it priced when you ship it, when you invoice it. So you have an option to do that inside of XA. And that is that question too. Now, when you look at it on the green screen, literally you got 5 words. Order priced at entry time. Yes. There is not a lot of description that shows up in the green screen as to what the questions are. On the right side of this right now, I am showing you what is in a manual. It's on Infor XA called the Planning and Installation Guide. If you go to XA CrossApp, the Planning and Installation Guide is a description of all the questions, besides some other implementation functions, that are in XA. And you can see it goes through much more detail. This question allows you to select order pricing during order entry or during invoicing. Answer yes to fix the prices at the time the order is entered. You can read the screen. I'm not going to read the whole screen. But you can see also question B3. All it says is calculate gross profit as 1. That's all it says. There's no place that I can hit the help button and get additional information. So you have to go to the Planning and Installation Guide, and sure enough, there's what code 1 means versus code 2. So the Planning and Installation Guide is still a very valuable resource, is available to all of you. It's on Infor XA. You can download it. In fact, I made sure I had the current copy of it when I was putting this PowerPoint together for this presentation. So you can see that it's being updated. It has all the current questions in it. So that's what it looks like as you're doing a questionnaire. Now, I also talked about IDF settings. An IDF setting is in the environment tab of your system. There is an object called application settings. And when you click application settings, it brings up the applications that you have loaded on your IBM system. So we can see over here that we have everything from business services, CrossApp, EPDM, material logistics. Now notice all the application names are the correct names. They are the new names. So instead of COM, we have customer service management. We have customer relationship management, etc. So we can look at these now, and as we go in to look at these, we can get now control files. These are not dedicated functions. These are things that we can do at any time and make changes at any time. So what I want to do is I want to walk through some of these applications. I'm going to touch on some examples of what they are, give you an idea of what's available. Again, there are hundreds of selections in here. We don't have time to go through all those, but it's important that you know that your system has more capabilities than just the buttons you've been pushing as we've come along so far. So the first thing we do inside the IDF, there's something called Business Information Services. Business Information Services is a new function that has to do with ION and causing XA through System Link to talk to ION, to talk to other systems, talk to business intelligence, talk to your data lake, talk to things that are relevant outside of your environment. Without going into a lot of the detail, it allows us to group codes so that we can be talking to multiple environments and understand what we're talking about. So we can differentiate and we can make common certain type of applications when we are using BODs. That's as technical as I'm going to get. But these are relevant to each application. This is a new function that you will take advantage of when you are implementing BODs inside of ION using XA. So what are some more of the normal applications? Well, here's XA. CrossApp. These are things that you're setting up basically to go across the entire environment. Now, for instance, a lot of you are still doing XA backups. And you're doing XA backups because you have batches and green screens that have to get cleared. They have to be updated and cleared so that those batches are still available. Did you know that you don't have to do that? I have a number of customers that are doing save while actives, are doing save systems, and don't ever want to take their application down to do a backup. How is it that they clear their batches? Well, that's right here, X2. Do you want to reuse your transaction batches? If you answer that to yes, when you process a batch, instead of going to finished, it's going to clear. Now you don't have to do that XA backup every day to clear out those batches. That is really an older function designed when the systems were less reliable and you needed to be able to restore transaction batches. Let me ask you, when was the last time you did a restore of your system? It just isn't the case anymore. Now, we still need good backups. I'm not getting away from that. What I'm saying is, though, we don't necessarily have to do that application backup just to clear batches. So what I'm going to do here is I go through questionnaires. You can see I have cross-application support up here. This is the IDF application settings. The one over here in green is still the green screen CrossApp questionnaire. I'm going to go through a number of different applications, just giving you an idea of what's available out there. And I will be differentiating those based on those colors. I probably won't say it on every screen because I have it consistent through the presentation. So as you're looking at it, these can be changed on the fly. These require a dedicated application. Moving on, what are some of the things that we can do in this system? Now, if you're an enterprise PDM, I'm sure you've noticed you have 4 user fields, cost fields, that show up on your costing screen. You also have 4 summary fields, material, labor, overhead, and in this particular case, outside operations. Those are defaulted by Infor, but you don't have to do what they do. First of all, you can summarize the totals right here. I have some customers that use material, labor, fixed overhead, variable overhead. In this particular case, I have material, outside operations, labor, and overhead. You can make those 4 summary fields anything you want. And then in each of your fields, you have those 4 user fields at the bottom. Remember, you have 12 detailed cost fields, and they're called user cost 1, user cost 2. How do you define those? What do you use them for? Well, in the control file right here, this is where I can define them. So in this particular case, in my demo environment, I'm using user cost 1 as I'm putting freight in as a cost of the product. I want to roll the cost of the freight into the cost of the product so I can charge it correctly. I supply my own freight, but I don't want to bill the customer for freight. I want it buried in my cost. So notice I created these functions. Now notice these little check marks. You control which of the 4 summary fields are used when you roll up your cost. So purchase overhead rolls up into material. Outside operations rolls up into outside operations. I have set up labor and run labor that rolls up into labor. I have set up machine, run machine, manufacturing overhead, and freight. And by the way, I've coded the other 3 user fields, all rolling up into overhead. That's how this works. You can go in and change those descriptions on the fly. So some of you right now might be looking at some of your cost fields and saying, oh, I can change that. Well, this is where you do it. Yes, you can do it just that easy. Our questionnaire is showing us how we can, remember I said earlier, there are times that we change a file. Well, in a bill of material, you can control whether a user sequences causes you to sort the bill of material manually, a way you want, or if you want to sort it by component. Well, when you do that, you're changing keys to files. That's why it's dedicated. You can't have people in programs. So these are ways of setting up those files. So what they can put in the control files, they do. What still requires something dedicated, they left over here. So that's EPDM. That's the kind of stuff that's available as we go through. Here's material logistics. Now, material logistics is not a complicated application. It's mostly plumbing. That's a word that I use, at least. Plumbing meaning that a lot of things happen behind the scenes. Once you set it up, it is a powerful application, but it automates a lot of stuff. Plumbing because you don't see the plumbing in your house. When you turn on the water, you want water. Well, when you want to share orders, distribute orders to different plants, etc., there's a lot of plumbing there, but there's not a lot of action that you need to do. So there's not a lot of questions in here, but it allows us to set up what are the new transfer order numbers, things like that. This is a simple configuration on this process. The one that I'm going to point out here to you, I told you I might pick out 1 or 2 on each one. Perform automatic inventory adjustments. Now I'm shipping from plant 1 to plant 2. This is my product. I'm shipping it interplant. I shipped 100, and when plant 2 unloaded it, they only got 99. Well, obviously something's wrong somewhere. So this is a type of question that says, hey, when those 2 things are out of balance, do you want me to automatically balance this for your general ledger? Do you want me to do an inventory adjustment automatically? Or are you going to force your people to find out what happened? That's the kind of thing that you can set up here in an application control file. Here's customer service management. Now, customer service management is got a lot of information in the application itself. When you go into the company master, when you go into the setup files of the application, there's a lot of control things there, but there are still some control functions right here at the beginning. Now we started looking at these as an example on the first slide. There's, remember B2 and B3, orders priced at entry time, calculate gross profit as. Well, these are the types of questions that are listed in here. As I'm looking at this, notice I can pass special charge 3 into sales analysis. In other words, is it a cost, or do you want to use that code to be able to get into your sales analysis? Do you want to have booking records? Booking records mean when I take an order, do you want me to keep track of the orders that I booked, not the orders that I shipped? Most analysis is done on what our shipments are. But if you're doing forecasting, if you're tracking backlog, booking records, not shipping records, are what track that information. This is where you can determine how you're going to set that up. Material management, a lot of interesting things in this one. But how do you track your inventory? How do you use your inventory? When do you want error messages? When do you want warning messages? Well, for instance, if you over-receive a purchase order, do you want your receiving doc to get a hard error that says you're over-receiving? You can't do that. Set this product aside, talk to the buyer. There are a lot of companies that do that. If you have enough control over your inventory and over your supply chain, we require that you ship the correct quantity and not overship. Or would you like that to be a warning message that my receiving doc can override? Well, did you know that those were optional? You control whether or not you're over receiving to the doc, whether or not you over receive to inspection, whether you over receive to stock. And then do you accept tolerances? You know, a lot of things like in liquids and in paper products, there's a plus or minus 10% where the order is considered complete. That's just the standard in the industry. Do you allow that? Or do you need to close your orders on the correct quantity? So there's a lot of information here that you can set up that keep these things the way you want them to work. Now, some of you may have looked at batch lot in the item revision file. Said, boy, I'd like to experiment with that. You turned it on, nothing happened. But that doesn't work. Must be something wrong with the code. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. I don't know what it is. I'll fix it later. Well, here in our questionnaire, you have to turn that function on before that code in the item revision file works. So that's batch lot control right here. This has to be turned on because it changes the way the files work in materials management. So you can turn on that revision code in the item revision. It still won't work if the files aren't set up properly. So that's where some of these things are here. Notice I have quality control. Do I allow inventory to go negative at a location? There's a lot of information in here, very relevant to how I'm running my system. What type of costing do you use? Do you use average costing? Do you use standard costing? Last costing? That's a function right here, inventory accounting costing method, that you set up in your questionnaire. Hopefully this is giving you an example of some of the power of these things. Now, there are also some reports that when you key them up, there's values that are defaulted. Now in IDF, we can override some values, but in many cases, there's values that are defaulted that we don't override. And it sure would be nice to update those because I change them every time. Here's an example. When I print reports, these are all simply what are the default values that go on the screens, a part of application tailoring. Procurement. Man, I have all sorts of windows for procurement. When I go into IDF, when I'm in procurement management, I have 4 different tabs of information. Plus, I still have a loaded questionnaire out there. Now, some of these things match, meaning that notice I have weight factors for vendor performance here. I have weight factors for vendor performance over here. So I have consistency in some of these things. I've moved these to the control files, so I don't need a dedicated system anymore. They're still left over in the control file. If I update either one, it'll update the other, but I still have some duplicates. As I'm going through here, though, I can look at some of the key things just to make sure I understand. Again, I have warnings and errors that I can turn on. How do I want the processing to work in procurement? As I'm going through some of these things, if you have 3-way match turned on, process invoices in purchasing. What that means is don't close out a purchase order without the invoice being processed. It would be nice if it just said 3-way match, yes, no, but that's the terminology that they use. So as we're looking at these things, that's where some of these things are. Here's printing. What are some of my defaults? I told you you could have different forms. Here's a form type. So again, you guys can read your screens. I want you to know where they are. Notice we have a lot of these functions also in the questionnaire. Nothing I'm going to highlight on this one, again, except for the fact that some of these are duplicated, but you can go through this any way you like. Now, this says order-based production management, but I also threw rep in here too. So here I have order-based production management. How do you, when you're looking at a part and it says quantity available, how do you know what that calculation is? Well, you have some input into that. For instance, do you want to consider future allocations as available? I have a customer requirement for this part next week. But I have that part on the shelf right now. Do I want quantity available to say, nope, I need it next week, it's not available now? Or do I want net available to show me this part as available because I can make more by next week? You control that calculation right here. Then as we're going through our individual pieces over here, we have all sorts of different kinds of stuff, but how do you edit your labor? Do you use a tolerance when you close out your manufacturing order? If you're closing things out at 99 instead of 100 and you're constantly getting warning messages and you don't want them, you can control some of that stuff. So as you're going through this, a lot of these questions are here. I highly recommend that you review that planning guide that I showed you earlier. Read through what the questions are. Learn what you can affect in your own system. Just because it's been set up that way for years doesn't mean you're still running the business the same way, or maybe it was never set up properly in the first place. Customer Relationship Management, CRM. If you're using XA's CRM, here's where we set up a couple things. Most of that is an IDF application. It's set up in IDF. We only have basically a couple of US dollar questions for CRM. So that's a pretty straightforward, easy one to get through. Enterprise Financials. We actually have two control files, one for EGL and one for the rest of financials, but this is where we set them up. Again, Enterprise Financials is one of the most powerful financial systems now on the market. Those of you that have been with XA for a long time, I go back, unfortunately, to when accounting management was the only choice. Then we came out with IFM, which was nice, but it came out pre-Windows, which is why it's never come out in the IDF environment very well. And now they have Enterprise Financials. The point is, through those processes, we now have a financial system that's worthy of the rest of our manufacturing system. Earlier, we had a financial system. Yeah, if you want a good manufacturing system, get XA. And by the way, we have a financial system. Now, this is very powerful, very robust. And by the way, not that this is about finance, but we've got releases coming up. Green screens are going to be going away. You should be looking at Enterprise Financials. It is the go forward system. And eventually, if you're running XA and you're keeping current, both accounting management and international financial management are going away. Hopefully that's not new news to anybody on this webinar, but if it is, contact your affiliate, contact me, resolve that timeline, because this is not something you're going to just convert to over a weekend. This is a 2 to 6 month conversion process. Plan for it appropriately. Then, of course, we have Netlink. Netlink is where we're going to be taking over our main user interface, taking over from PowerLink. Why do we have to do that? Well, first of all, everything you do on a computer nowadays is on an HTML server, right? You're using Chrome, you're using the new Microsoft, you're using something, you're on a server. An HTML Netlink interface is more powerful and faster than PowerLink. Again, this is something you need to consider. Now, today, I understand if you haven't seen the Inforum releases that are coming out, today there are still some things that we're doing in PowerLink we can't do in Netlink. That's getting fixed. Now, workbenches are not coming over as is. They're coming over with new capabilities. We can tie multiple screens together. We can do all this. We can split windows. We have the ability to do it, but we have to set it up different. And I know some people use workbenches a great deal. That's okay. Long term, Netlink is faster. If you have a remote plant and you haven't put in a remote desktop or you haven't put in Citrix, I am sure that you're getting complaints about how slow PowerLink is. Netlink is the solution, and it's the go forward interface. It's also the interface that allows you to tie into Ion. It's also the interface that allows you to pull up your old green screen programs and not have to sign on separately into the system. All of it's there. Again, if I'm saying something you didn't know, call us. Make sure you understand what the technology is. The defaults here simply are, where do you want your tabs? What do you want it to look like? This is pretty straightforward because everything else is considered through your preferences in IDF. Then we have an old application. This is not going forward in IDF. This will remain valid for those of you that are running payroll. I just said green screen's going away. They're not putting payroll into the IDF. This is not going to be considered a core XA application anymore because it's not being converted to IDF. But for those people still running payroll, it will continue to be supported. It will continue to run. Again, we have a lot of questionnaire functions. How do you set up everything from cash accounting methods to tax distributions, etc.? You've got to walk through here. And then all your default account numbers by company. So this is where you set all this stuff up. It's in the questionnaire. There is no IDF control file for this because I just said payroll is staying on the green screen. It will continue to run through System I Workspace Anywhere, which is a tool in Netlink. I want to make sure that we're using those things the way they're designed. All right, from planning applications. Now, I have here, and right underneath the application, it says here's forecasting, master production scheduling, material requirements planning, and capacity requirements planning. These are all questionnaires. If you go to advanced planners, which is the visual planner, or you go to throughput, these control files are not the things that are managing those applications. These are managing the older green screen applications. For the most part, these are updated into the IDF, but it's still being controlled through these old questionnaires. The go forward tool here is Visual Planner. As I'm going through all these applications, it simply gives me the opportunity to be telling you that if you're still running MRP, you should be looking at Visual Planner. The technology is moving ahead, you should be too. And then we have some financial functions. We have international financial management, we have contract accounting, we have financial analysis. These are questionnaires associated with those particular applications, not really going through any of these things in particular. For the most part, enterprise financials replaces IFM and financial analysis. So the only thing left is contract accounting, and that's now called project management. And so it is a go forward cost tracking capability, especially if you're doing Department of Defense or you do contract manufacturing. It will handle all those functions for you. And then a couple more miscellaneous things. Most of these are actually product, well, the first two at least, are products that are going away: knowledge-based configurator, sales analysis. If you own these things, you know, nowadays we're looking at business intelligence. We're looking at CPQ. We have state-of-the-art systems that just put these things to shame. So there's no need to keep these older applications alive. If you haven't heard from Inform, production monitoring and control has been announced as they're upgrading it to enterprise production management and control. And it is going to be an ePMC application that will replace PM and C. I have not seen the outline of what this looks like yet, but it's been announced that it will be a part of probably what they're now calling Release 11, which will be out in 2 years. Release 10, if you haven't heard, is now coming out next year. They moved it up. That's exciting. So we have a couple of major releases coming out, but PM and C, I put it in with these miscellaneous green screen apps because it's still a green screen app and it will be going away. So we've just walked through all the applications that have questionnaires or control files. Something else I want to point out, because this comes to me all the time as a question. Still in the environment, there's something called maintenance classes. Now, maintenance classes goes into a list of every single object in XA. And basically the bottom line, it says, this is where you turn on maintenance history. If you want to keep an electronic maintenance history, what the value was before, what the value is after, who changed it, the date and the time. If you want a history of that, you turn it on by file. This is where you do it. And if you want not only a history of that, but you want to force additional controls, you want a reason code, you can turn that on here too, because reason tracking is right over here to the right. So we can go through and understand everything from what files we have, what has changed, and if I had a reason code, that's the same thing, for instance, as an engineering change number. I can track back the reason that I've made this change, and you can associate an EC file across that for your item files. So again, setting up the system, pretty much done at this point. There's one more thing I want to do. A lot of our systems, a lot of our capabilities change based on how we set up our everyday files. I'm not going through these, but I want you to be aware that your company number controls a lot of what you do, especially when you're dealing with anything that have dollars. Your warehouse controls inventory, it controls planning. Your sites control engineering, it controls the entire PDM database inside of EPDM. IDF Workspace is a powerful configuration tool. I was just at a customer the other day, and they wanted to track their trucks. They had 300 trucks. Well, they wanted to put them in inventory and track them in such a way, they wanted a truck master file. Well, we went into the item revision file, created a subset of a couple of fields that would identify this as a truck, and then we told it save this as its own object. And on their IDF screen right now is a truck master. Now, if I go down into my item revision file, none of the trucks show up. And if I go into the truck master, none of my item revisions show up. And in fact, instead of item number, it says truck number. And the defaults of all the classes and things like that are specific to the truck. You have the ability to do that in IDF. You know, in your financial system, if you're running IFM, your accounts receivable and accounts payable files are actually the same files. They are workspaces to control how you enter data into those functions. So tailoring this stuff is very important. In PowerLink, Netlink, and System I Workspace Anywhere, these can be set up, configured for the user that's signed on. What do they want to see? What are their favorites? How do they manage their system? When they go into objects, what views, what functions do they see? These are all setup functions. And I don't have to set them up for every single user. I can have security group profiles. So I can associate things together. So besides all the questionnaires, besides everything that I just went through, I want to make sure that you understand all of these tools, these 6 tools that I list, are part of how you can configure your system. Now, for those of you that are used to me going into a lot of business functions, which I usually do on these webinars, I realized today was much more tactical, much more setup, much more foundational. I hope it was worthwhile for you. I hope it triggered something for you to investigate. And I hope it lets you know that you can go back and make your own XA system process the way you want it to process. So with that, Brad, I don't know if there's been any questions or not. I haven't shut up long enough to ask you that question. So do we have anybody that's got any questions?
Thank you very much. There are no questions currently in the chat function, so I'll give everybody a minute or so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. While we're thinking about that, I also like to invite everybody to our part 4 of our XA web series called The Ins and Outs of Features, Options, and Pricing in XA Customer Orders. It's on October 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and emails and invitations will be going out for that as well. At this time, I don't have any questions, and this has been recorded, and it will be sent out to attendees for future reference, or if there's somebody else in your organization that you think should see this, please feel free to share that. With that, I'd like to thank Rick, and I'd like to thank all of our customers and attendees for attending this session. I hope it was value to you, and look forward to seeing you at our next session on October 13th. Thank you very much.